What historical fact sounds truthful, but is actually false? Vomitoriums were places for Romans to vomit during feasts, so they could continue eating. They were actually just entrances/exits to amphitheaters. Fighting pits where the gladiators fought were covered in a thin layer of sand, called arena. My mind has been blown. Everything makes sense now. I'm from the UK and I have a Aussie friend who couldn't believe that Sherlock Holmes was fictional and that Jack the Ripper was a real person. If you think about it, it makes sense. A shrouded, invisible slasher prowling the streets of London, whose identity to this day is a mystery, is a real historical figure and a man who investigates and solves real crimes, whose address is known and who actually has a real statue outside of a tube station in London, is a character made up in a fictional series of novels. Have to admit, I was shocked when I learned that Sherlock Holmes was a fictional character. Even more shocked when I realized that King Arthur was not real. I was 8 or 9 when my older brother had to explain to me that on her deathbed, Queen Elizabeth is not going to give Prince Charles Excalibur, thus making him king. Yes, I really believed that. I was 8 or 9 when my older brother had to explain to me that on her deathbed, Queen Elizabeth is not going to give Prince Charles Excalibur, thus making him king. Yes, I really believed that. Not sure which is less believable, the Excalibur thing or Prince Charles outliving Elizabeth. The Iron Maiden was a medieval torture device. As far as I recall, the concept was created by a rich old crazy man in the late 1800s for a display, and it sort of worked its way into the public consciousness. But it was never used as a torture implement, medieval or otherwise. Never underestimate the sheer evil of some of the torture devices implemented. Oh, I know. Some of them are beyond words, which is why I can't help but wonder, why invent your own? Gladiators always fought to the death. Apostrophe. The reality is that gladiators were incredibly expensive slaves, not just to purchase, but to maintain. For gladiators to be entertaining, they had to fight well. This meant that you had to purchase men and women. Yes, there were female gladiators who were late teens, early 20s and in good health. Then, you had to feed them very well, expensive. Train them, expensive. And treat them well with good living quarters and such. The Romans learned from the Spartan rebellion to not mistreat them. Killing a gladiator in the arena was akin to smashing up a Lamborghini at a monster truck rally, if the Lamborghini also had friends that would hold a grudge and run you over at the first chance. Usually, gladiators fought to second blood. They were trained to draw blood but not maim. They all knew one another. When gladiators fought to the death during high-profile games, they, if they lived, and their families, if they didn't, were compensated quite well for it. That's why it is always mentioned in the histories when they killed gladiators in a celebration. It highlights how expensive those games were. Also, they weren't super buff. They tended to have a layer of fat over their muscles for added protection. Slicing the fat made them bleed more, which looked good for the crowds, but didn't seriously injure the gladiator. All I can say is holy duck, living in the past sounds horrible. That Vikings had horns on their hats. That was invented by the Victorians. If they did have horns, they wouldn't be very useful. They're just a target to knock your hat off, or if it's strapped on, a lever to chop your head off. Even though Viking helmets never had horns, I don't think it's wise to use modern views of practicality as a way of verifying whether something is historical fact. History is loaded with military practices that don't have any surface level benefits. Sometimes it's informed by the culture they come from. Maybe in some culture the horns could have denoted status. Sometimes the impractical military items are used only in a ceremonial capacity. Sometimes we're not thinking of the full picture. Horns on a helmet could very well add an intimidation factor. And sometimes people just do dumb things that don't work. It honestly doesn't seem crazy to put horns on a helmet if you consider the crests that some Romans and Greeks had on their helmets, or the famous wings on Polish hussars. Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." Actually, she didn't. And this is such a widely accepted mistake that when you take a tour of Versailles, one of the first things your tour guide will tell you, unprompted, is no. Marie Antoinette did not say let them eat cake. Please stop spreading this lie. Marie Antoinette is one of the most misunderstood and villainized people in history. Here you have this 13-year-old Austrian princess who has been taught that she has been chosen by God to have everything handed to her on a silver platter, and everything as every is given is from the backs of those beneath her as God intended. Suddenly shipped off to marry the meek and incompetent heir to the French throne, a boy barely older than herself. As soon as she arrives, she instantly mistrusted and looked down upon because she is Austrian. This barely teenage girl is treated like a spy and like dirt because she comes from the enemy. France and Austria weren't too fond of each other, and it was hoped their marriage would form an alliance. At age just 14, she and Prince Louis marry and are immediately whisked away to the marital bed to do the hanky-panky to make an heir then and there. Oh, and yeah, they have an audience of people watching to make sure it happens. A group of grown men are watching this teenagers to make sure they have sex. Lovely, of course. Prince Louis is a little shy as the boy in king department, so an heir isn't conceived for years. Whose fault is that? Who is to blame for not producing the heir to the French throne? Mary, of course. She is to blame. Not Louis, who is too scared of peepees and woo-woos. But the dirty little Austrian! Exclamation mark. With all this smack talk, pressure to produce an heir, a weak-willed husband who had no idea how to run a country, and not a sympathetic ear to turn to, it was no wonder Mary turned to material things to give her comfort. She was totally alone, and she was barely an adult. To be fair, Louis had some penis condition where it was painful to have an erection, I think. Medieval European peasants ate potatoes. Medieval European peasants ate tomatoes. Pineapples are from the Pacific Islands. All three are incorrect. All three of these foods are indigenous to South America. Damn. I love all of those. I'm glad they came to other countries. Napoleon wasn't short. He was average height. For his time, it was even a bit more than average. The Dark Ages were a dreadful period with nothing innovative happening, and in no way make up a huge part of what defines our modern society. It's so sad that we perpetuate this myth. Even the brightest minds of today don't understand how smart those people were. People of the time had figured how the equator must work, roughly how big the earth was. Columbus actually had a wrong guess that went against the Greeks' still accurate measure that the earth was round, and so on and so forth. They wrote stories about robots. The rich would constantly look at the mechanical workings of things like clocks and imagine the bright futures humanity had ahead of them, not the demons that turned the gears inside. Some monks had even figured that maybe Earth wasn't the center of the universe, and that heaven and hell weren't literally up and down, prompting a very basic consideration of a fourth dimension of sorts, an in and out of our reality. At least, it wasn't any more or less vulgar, either. One of the most famous books from the time has a story about a man accidentally kissing a woman's butt while she farts in his face. Hell. Chaucer had the knowledge to play with the idea that some dirty jokes are funny, i.e., someone farting, and others are going too far, i.e., a man taking advantage of a woman. I highly recommend immersing yourself in medieval cultures if you ever get the chance. We weren't babbling idiots. We were the same normal idiots we are today. I think people just look at the Black Plague and the Great Fire of London and go, oh yeah, they were ducking idiots, haha. A. Yeah no. W. Because we've never burnt down a country or let a plague run rampant in the modern age. E. George Washington's teeth. Despite many people believing they were made of wood, they contained no wood. They were actually made of slave teeth, as well as other materials such as hippopotamus ivory, brass, or gold. So he was the dental equivalent of Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. In brothels in ancient Roman Pompeii they had picture over the doors to show what the prostitute was offering. Nah, they were just sexy pictures, guys. Sounds kind of like the same thing. Most of the movie Braveheart, most of the TV show Heart to Heart, most of Get Hard starring Kevin Hart. George Washington never chopped down a cherry tree and said I cannot tell a lie when asked if he did it by his father. And he was never offered kingship in America, only to turn it down because yay democracy or duck royals or whatever. That's another common one. I think the point is that he could continue running for re-election and everyone would keep voting for him no matter what. He would effectively be a king. Rome salted Carthage. I actually only learned a few days ago that this is false and the claim arose in the 19th century. Salt is expensive. No way they salted all of Carthage. When the Americans spent millions of dollars to engineer a pen that would work in the low pressures of space, Russia brought pencils. American capitalist pigs, am I right? People overlook the fact the Russians had pencil shavings floating in the zero gravity. Yeah. Fine flakes of conductive graphite really isn't what you want floating around in a high oxygen environment hundreds of kilometers above the earth. Russians also developed a zero-G pen shortly after. I don't think the conductivity of graphite is nearly as much of a fire hazard as it is likely to damage electronics. Nelson Mandela died in prison. The backwards V swear sign, which is sometimes used in the UK to tell someone to duck off, was first conceived at the Battle of Agincourt when English longbowmen taunted the French army with it, as captured archers would have these fingers cut off so they could not use a bow anymore. They would raise their hand sign aloft in mockery before aiming arrows down on the French army. Learned that it was a rude gesture by unknowingly using it in a loud pub to order 2 beers while on vacation in London. The bartender looked at me like she was going to jump the bar and knock me out. I must have looked bewildered because she leaned over the bar and explained it to me. Felt my face turn red. Canada as a whole has never done anything bad. As a Canadian, I know we've done some horrible shit. Hasn't every county? Yep. But some Americans have the stereotype that we do no wrong. Running was invented in 1863 by Andrew Running when he decided to walk twice at the same time. Running was invented in 1748 by Thomas Running when he tried to walk twice at the same time. Putting your elbows on the dinner table is considered rude, but it traces back to 19th century British copper mining. Miners would come home for dinner and, by putting their elbows on the table while eating dinner, transfer copper or residue to the table. That residue would then make its way to other surfaces, particularly dishware and cutlery, and the members of the household would eventually ingest toxic levels of copper, leading to illness and death. And what's the real reason? One theory I heard was that many tables were just a length of wood on a stump or similarly unstable surface. Leaning on the table was liable to knock it over and spill the food on the floor. Fun fact, copper is a natural antimicrobial agent, so copper workers had much lower infection rates during one of the plague outbreaks in Europe. I want to say bubonic, close bracket. Julius Caesar was the first emperor of Rome. Elvis Presley started the rumor that he was still alive. 45 men/people have held the office of President of the United States. It's only 44 because Grover Cleveland was the 22nd and the 24th president. Dick Cheney was president for 2 hours and 5 minutes on July 22nd, 2007 when George W. Bush underwent surgery. Nice. I love these random little facts. Not sure if there is a meaningful distinction between acting president and president. I'm guessing it'd be too messy and ruin the meat chain if 2 hours counted. If it went on for a week or two it probably would. Then again, didn't a first lady act as president quite a while back when her husband was quite ill? Maybe FDR. And that went on for a decent length of time. Romans were openly accepting of gay relationships and sex. The homosexual acts that occurred during the time were by men of a higher status forcing themselves onto slaves and underage boys. It wasn't a sexual utopia by any means, and was based on toxic ideals of hypermasculinity, slavery, and class. The crude way to sum up Roman ideas of sexuality was that they had prison dynamics. To penetrate or be pleasured was considered masculine, and to be penetrated or give pleasure was considered feminine. In fact, the gayest thing that a Roman guy could do was eat a girl out, because it put the man in the woman's role and the woman in the man's role. There was even graffiti in ancient Pompeii calling out a man who ate out girls like a dog. Apostrophe. Alexander Graham Bell did not invent telephone. It was Antonio Meucci who did that, and he got robbed. Wasn't Bell a patent clerk that stole it or something like that? During the Cold War, the Russian and American governments refused to research ghosts, Bigfoot, telekinesis and mind control because that would be dumb and a waste of resources. Hamilton is an anti-slavery activist. Brought to you by Hamilton. Good learning experience for me was actually looking into the history of the founding fathers after watching Hamilton. Great musical. And I think it's healthy to learn how to differentiate the art from the source material. Then having the art inspire you to look deep into said source material. I'm not sure how to explain this, as I'm trying to understand it myself. I think you said it perfectly. Hamilton the musical inspired me to learn more about the founding fathers and the American Revolution. We shouldn't consider Hamilton as fact. Boo. Like anything else, a jumping off point to look into something, if it interests us. The Irish famine was caused by a potato blight. The truth was that there was plenty of food in Ireland, but it was being exported to feed Britain's industrial revolution. It was genocide. The British government certainly had shitty policies that led to it. But no, they were not trying to wipe out the Irish. The land was owned by British lords, and the Irish peasants would work it for beef and grain for the lords to eat or sell. They farmed potatoes for themselves. For all the terrible ways they treated the Irish were used as a source of economic exploitation. Your workers can't work the land for your profit if they're dead. They didn't have a reason to wipe them out. The British response was bad. Yeah, they didn't care enough about their suffering until it was too late, and they realized they would lose their workforce. They did bring in food relief with corn and wheat imports, which still caused problems, since many died of scurvy, which doesn't happen on potatoes, since they have vitamin C. If they were really trying to wipe them out, they wouldn't have brought in those imports. Gandhi had a small dung. It's not true. He had a massive ducking hog. Just a mega ducking bratwurst and balls as big as a days along. Thank you. That was exquisite. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe for more videos.